The courtroom doors creaked open, and suddenly, every whisper fell silent. In walked Jennifer Lopez Lowe. But this wasn't the glamorous megastar from red carpets or stadium stages. This was a visibly tense woman, her eyes locked straight ahead, her jaw set like stone. She took the stand slowly, the sound of her heels echoing through the chamber. You could feel it in the room. This wasn't just another celebrity testimony. Something heavy was about to drop. The judge adjusted his glasses and glanced toward the prosecution. "You may proceed," he said. A young female prosecutor rose, her voice sharp but calm. "Miss Lopez, we understand this is difficult, but can you please state for the record your relationship to Mr. Sean Combs during the years 1999 through 2001? J-Lo hesitated for the first time. Her eyes scanned the courtroom, landing somewhere. In the back, where Diddy sat barely moving. For a moment, it was as if time had paused. Then came her voice, soft, fragile, trembling. "I was in love with him. But I didn't know what love really was back then." Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable video, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon. That way you'll never miss a new one like this. Now let's get back to it. A ripple of gasps swept across the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel once to silence the reaction, but it was already too late. The energy had shifted. Everyone could feel it. The prosecutor leaned in. "Miss Lopez, were you aware of Mr. Combs' business dealings during that time? The people he surrounded himself with?" J-Lo nodded slightly, her lips pressing together. "I knew enough to know. I had to pretend I didn't." Murmurs again. The court reporter's fingers clattered faster across the keyboard. The prosecutor continued. "You were present the night of the December 1999 shooting at Club New York." Hand trembled as she raised a tissue to her lips. "Yes," she said, "but I wasn't supposed to be." People in the gallery began to shift, some stunned, some nodding, as if hearing confirmation of rumors long whispered. J-Lo paused, looked down at her lap, then continued. "That night changed everything. I remember the screams, the gunfire, the blood. But what I remember most was the silence after. Diddy told me to keep quiet, said if you love me, you'll handle this like a queen. So I did." What pin could have dropped in that courtroom? The judge glanced at the defense table, but Diddy remained expressionless still. Cold. And just as the prosecutor was about to ask her next question, Jennifer looked straight at the jury and said something no one expected. "You don't know what it's like to be in love and terrified at the same time. That was my life." The judge cleared his throat. "We will continue after a short recess," but no one moved. Not really. Because for the first time, people weren't looking at Jennifer Lopez, the icon. They were seeing Jennifer Lopez, the survivor. The court resumed after a brief break, but the energy in the room hadn't settled. If anything, it had intensified. Reporters outside were already filing breathless updates. Inside, all eyes were back on Jennifer, who now sat slightly forward, both hands gripping the edge of the witness stand as if anchoring herself to reality. The prosecutor stood again. "Miss Lopez, thank you for continuing. We'd like to go back to the aftermath of the club shooting. What happened when you and Mr. Combs left the scene?" J-Lo exhaled, steadying her voice. "We got into a black SUV. He didn't say anything at first. He just kept looking at his phone. He turned to me and said, 'We're going to be all right. You just gotta trust me.'" She paused, her voice quieter now. "But I didn't feel all right. I didn't feel safe. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't in control of anything." The courtroom was locked in no coughs, no movement, just the quiet turning of heads toward Diddy. His expression still hadn't cracked. The prosecutor stepped forward again. "Did he instruct you to say anything specific to the police?" Jennifer nodded. "He told me not to talk at all. Said everything would be handled. And then a man, someone I didn't know, called me later that night. He told me I'd be taken care of if I stayed loyal."
Wow, what did that mean to you?
"It meant that my silence was more valuable than the truth." One of the jurors shifted uncomfortably. Another scribbled something in a notebook. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't tabloid fluff. This was witness testimony under oath. It was unraveling everything the world thought it knew. The prosecutor kept pushing. Jennifer, at any point, did you want to go to the police?
Hello?
Hesitated. Her eyes glazed over. Yes, I wanted to. But I also knew. The world wasn't built to believe women like me. I was the Latina pop star dating the powerful black mogul. If I spoke out, I'd be seen as disloyal, as dramatic, or worse, as disposable. She took a shaky breath. And in that moment, her vulnerability filled the courtroom like thunder. Told my mother once, she whispered. I told her I didn't feel safe. She begged me to leave, but I was too deep. I was scared. Silence. The prosecutor looked back at the judge, then to the gallery. Let the record show that Miss Lopez has identified consistent patterns of emotional coercion, fear-based loyalty, and third-party intimidation. But Jennifer wasn't done. She looked directly at the jury again. I kept quiet for over 2 decades, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew saying it would change everything, and it already has. And with that, the entire courtroom shifted again, not in volume, but in truth. For the first time, people understood. Behind the headlines, behind the romance, behind the glitz, was a woman who lived through something she never chose. The courtroom lights, us, buzzed faintly as the next line of questioning began. The prosecutor flipped through a folder and carefully pulled out a set of photographs. They were grainy, dated, and stamped with police evidence codes. One by one, they were handed to the judge, then shown to the jury. In each photo, Jennifer. Lopez stood beside Diddy, arms locked, smiles wide. But behind those expressions, something else lingered, something cold, something rehearsed. The prosecutor turned back to Jennifer. Do you recognize these? She didn't even glance down. Yes, every one of them. Where were they taken? Private parties, industry events. But some of them were never supposed to be seen by the public. The jury leaned in. The gallery stirred. This was new. Jennifer's voice lowered. There. Were these gatherings? Diddy liked to call them family nights, but they weren't family. They weren't innocent. People were told to leave their phones at the door. Celebrities, executives, women I'd never seen again after those nights. It was like stepping into another world, and once you were in, you didn't speak about it. Ever. It's the prosecutor. Raised an eyebrow. Are you saying there were things happening at these events that you felt uncomfortable being around? Jennifer blinked slowly. I felt terrified. I watched people change. Smiles would disappear behind closed doors. People laughed too loud at things that weren't funny. There were whispers. Rooms you weren't supposed to open. And Diddy controlled it all without saying a word. You just knew. A low gasp came from someone in the back. The judge shot. A glance across the gallery, but didn't interrupt. The prosecutor walked closer. Were you ever asked to invite others to these events? Yes, she said. Sometimes it was framed as, bring your girls or she's cute, bring her next time. But it was never casual. It felt strategic. Like I was being used to make others feel safe. Like if JLO's there, how bad could it be? You ever witnessed anything illegal? Jennifer hesitated. There was one night, she said, voice cracking, when a girl barely 20 stumbled out of her room crying. Her dress was ripped. She couldn't even speak. I wanted to help her, but Diddy looked at me and said, she'll be fine. She knows the rules. A stunned silence took over the room. The jury sat frozen, some with clenched jaws, others in disbelief. Jennifer took a moment before continuing. After that, I stopped bringing anyone. I became quieter, started pulling away. That's when the manipulation got worse. He'd guilt me, accuse me of being disloyal, not supporting his vision. He always called it that, his vision. But it felt more like a nightmare. The prosecutor glanced briefly at the judge, then turned back to the stand. Miss Lopez, did anyone ever step in to protect you? She shook her head slowly. No, no one could, because Diddy wasn't just powerful, he was untouchable. He had money, lawyers, connections. People were scared. I was scared. A heavy silence lingered in the courtroom like the truth had finally shattered the illusion. Every word from Jennifer's mouth was another thread unraveling the perfect picture the world had accepted for years. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't a Hollywood drama. This was real. It had been buried until now. The room felt colder. Now, like the truth had sucked the warmth from the walls. Even the judge, who had kept a stoic face through most of the testimony, looked unsettled. The prosecutor moved with more purpose now. As if sensing that the jury was no longer skeptical, they were transfixed. She approached the stand with a folder of handwritten letters carefully bound in evidence sleeves. "Miss Lopez, you've recovered these from your former residence letters dated between 1999 and 2001. Would you confirm if these are in your handwriting?" Jennifer looked down. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the first page. A soft gasp escaped her lips. "Yes," she whispered. "I wrote all of these. Were they ever sent?" "It'o," I wrote. Then, because I didn't have anyone I could trust enough to say these things to, so I wrote to myself, to God, to no one. The prosecutor carefully unfolded the first letter and read aloud. "Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing, like I've been edited out of my own life." Just a figure standing beside him, smiling. "On cue, I want out, but I'm scared of what it means." A hush swept the courtroom. Not even a pen scratched. Jennifer looked down, blinking back tears. That was right after the third time he accused me of disloyalty. All I did was question where he disappeared to at 3 a.m. He slammed the door so hard it cracked the glass. She looked up, her voice growing firmer. "I started to realize love shouldn't feel like walking on glass barefoot." The prosecutor moved on to another letter. "I saw things I can't unsee, heard things I shouldn't have heard. And now I wonder if staying silent makes me guilty too." The words echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. One of the jurors swallowed hard. A member of the gallery dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Jennifer's hands were folded tightly. "Now," she continued, without being prompted, "I wanted someone to tell me it wasn't normal, that I wasn't crazy. But I was surrounded by people who told me I had it all, that I was lucky, and I started to believe them, till the silence became too loud to ignore." The prosecutor approached with one final letter. This one was never dated. "Do you remember writing this?" Jennifer's eyes scanned it. She closed them slowly, then nodded. "That was the night I packed my bags." The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Permission to read the final excerpt. Granted." The courtroom held its collective breath. "If I stay, I'll lose myself. If I leave, I'll lose everything. I just want my life back. Not the fame, not the headlines. Just peace." Jennifer wiped a tear from her cheek. "That was the night I chose peace." For a moment, everything stood still.
Owie.
The jury wasn't just listening, they were feeling. The gallery wasn't just watching, they were witnessing. And Jennifer Lopez wasn't just telling her story. She was rewriting the past the world had accepted without question. The prosecutor stepped back slowly, her voice low. "No further questions at this time, Your Honor." But everyone knew it wasn't over. Not even close. The courtroom had shifted. What started as testimony was now something heavier. Like decades of silence were being peeled away one page at a time. The judge called for the next exhibit. A series of voicemails, dated, archived, preserved, each one played through the courtroom speaker voice, low but unmistakable. It was Diddy. "You think you can walk away from me and not pay a price? You owe me, Jen? Don't forget who made you. If you talk, it's not just your name that gets dragged. It's your family's." Every word was ice. The jury didn't flinch, but you could feel the tension twist like a rope pulled too tight. Jennifer sat frozen as her own past echoed through the room. Her eyes glistened, but her hands didn't move. She had heard those words before many times, and the whole world was hearing them too. The prosecutor turned slowly. "Miss Lopez, were these messages directed at you?" She nodded once, voice barely audible. "Yes, after I left him." "And how did they make you feel at the time?" Jennifer took a deep breath, then answered with a clarity that pierced through the silence. "They made me afraid to answer my phone for almost a year. I changed numbers, moved homes, hired security, was constantly looking over my shoulder. People thought I was being dramatic, but when someone tells you they made you, you believe they can break you too. The prosecutor nodded, then pulled up a new file on the monitor video stills. Behind-the-scenes moments, award shows, studio recordings, private island parties. Diddy's hand is always on her back. His grip is always firm. His presence is always looming. These images were recovered from private archives. Were they ever published? No, Jennifer said. He controlled the photographers, controlled the footage. Nothing made it out without his approval. He wasn't just building a brand. He was building a narrative. And I was part of it whether I agreed or not. The jury leaned in again. Eyes locked on the monitor. This wasn't gossip. It was orchestration. Was there ever a time you tried to speak out before today? The prosecutor asked. Jennifer stared forward. What? Once I confided in someone, a director. I told him I didn't feel safe. The next day I got a call from Diddy. He already knew. Said I needed to learn the rules of the industry, I remember. Thinking, are there rules? And who made them? Her voice cracked. I learned quickly. Silence was the rule. Survival was the reward. Another image flicked on the screen. J-Lo at a music video shoot, eyes red from crying, makeup being touched. Up, mid-shot. Diddy behind her whispering something. The caption read, Unreleased footage, 2000. The prosecutor stepped aside. No further exhibits at this time. But the jury didn't look away from the screen. Jennifer finally broke the silence. I spent years trying to outrun that. Version of myself, the one who smiled on command, who danced when told, who stayed quiet when it mattered most. She paused, looked down at her hands. But silence is a prison. Began walking out. No gavel, no reaction. Just silence, the kind that follows a truth too big to ignore. Jennifer sat still, but her presence now filled every corner of the courtroom. The facade had cracked wide open, and for the first time, the world wasn't seeing a pop star. We're seeing a woman who had survived a private war behind the glare of cameras. The prosecutor, sensing the gravity of the moment, stepped forward with one final question. Miss Lopez, before we continue, is there anything else you want to say before cross-examination begins? Jennifer looked toward the judge, then to the jury. She adjusted the mic slightly and spoke not with fear, but with deliberate calm. I spent years making excuses for him, for the things I saw, for the things he did, for the way I was treated. I told myself that love was supposed to be messy, that loyalty meant silence. But that wasn't love, that was controlled rest. Up as devotion. She paused, letting the words settle. There's something you need to understand. This industry rewards power, not truth. And he had all the power. He knew which reporters to call. He knew how to spin the story. He knew how to make people disappear, emotionally, financially, professionally. You speak out, you vanish. The prosecutor gave her space. She wasn't answering a question anymore. She was delivering truth the courtroom didn't even know it needed. People ask why I stayed. Why didn't I run sooner? But when someone is the gatekeeper to your career, your safety, your identity, it doesn't feel like you can just run. It feels like there's nowhere to go. She looked directly at Diddy, now sitting just feet away. You made me think I was nothing without you, that no one would believe me, that my silence was my safety net. But you underestimated one thing. I wasn't afraid of losing my fame, was afraid of losing my soul. Gasps spread through the gallery. Even the stenographer paused for a split second before catching herself. Jennifer continued, now trembling slightly. You used your influence to bury people's stories. You surrounded yourself with loyalty bought through fear. But I'm not afraid anymore. I built myself before you, and I rebuilt myself after you. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. I'm not on this stand because I want revenge. I'm here because truth is the only thing I have left to give. And maybe, just maybe, someone else watching this, someone who feels trapped like I once did, will see this moment and realize they can speak too. The judge glanced at the prosecutor, then at Diddy's defense team. Defense may now proceed. But no one moved, because in that instant, nothing mattered more than what had just been said. No cross-examination, No headline. No power move could erase it. The truth was now part of the record, permanent, unshakable, and finally free. The defense attorney rose slowly. Every movement is calculated. His tailored suit is pristine. His expression is unreadable. He approached the witness stand with a soft voice and a tight smile, clearly rehearsed, clearly confident. But Jennifer wasn't the same woman who walked into that courtroom hours earlier. Her shoulders were squared. Her voice is steady. Her truth is already out in the open. There was no more fear left to use against her. "Miss Lopez," the attorney began, "you've told a compelling story today. But isn't it true that in 1999, you voluntarily chose to remain in a relationship with Mr. Combs after the club incident?" She didn't blink. "I chose survival. That's what women do when they're told every door without him will be slammed in their face." A murmur rolled through the gallery. The attorney pressed on, undeterred. "And during that relationship, you received career boosts, endorsements, film roles. Would you say you benefited from the connection?" Jennifer leaned forward. "Would you call it a benefit if you had to trade your voice for visibility? Your peace for protection? I didn't benefit. I bargained." He paused for a second, regrouping. "You say he manipulated you, but you're a grown woman, Miss Lopez. You had the means, the resources. Why not walk away sooner?" She stared at him, her eyes cold as ice. "Because power doesn't always chain you with violence. It chains you with fear, with isolation, with the whisper that no one will believe you, that you'll disappear the moment you speak." Then she turned to the jury. "You all see me as strong now, successful, unbreakable. But back then, I was 29, wrapped in diamonds and dread. I couldn't breathe without asking permission. I smiled for the cameras while shrinking inside." The attorney tried again, tone now cooler. "Miss Lopez, do you recall telling the press in 2000 that Diddy was a visionary, a genius, and someone you deeply admired?" "Yes," she answered. "I said that. Just like victims of abuse say they're fine when their ribs are bruised. I said what I had to say to get through it, because no one listens when you're screaming if your lips are still smiling." Then came the moment. The attorney, in a final gambit, asked, "Is it your testimony that Mr. Combs made you feel threatened?" Controlled. Jennifer didn't hesitate. Her voice dropped, but every syllable rang out like thunder. "He made me feel trapped. Like if I ever chose myself, I'd lose everything. He didn't have to raise a hand. He raised a reality where my silence was the only currency that kept me safe." The courtroom froze. That was it. That was the fracture through which the whole narrative split. A juror gasped softly. The judge glanced toward the bench, visibly affected. Even the reporters in the back lowered their pens for a beat. And across the aisle, Diddy blinked, his jaw tightened, his composure faltering just for a second. Because that sentence, "He made me feel trapped," wasn't just testimony. It was truth carved in steel, the turning point. No PR team could erase it. The one line that would live longer than any music chart or tabloid scandal. It wasn't a headline anymore. It was history, and it had just been written on the record in her voice. Under oath, the air in the courtroom changed. Thicker, quieter, like the building itself was holding its breath. The judge gave a brief nod, signaling the next and final round of questions. The prosecutor stood again, this time not with a binder or a stack of evidence, but with a single sheet of paper. She approached slowly, and for the first time her tone was soft. Not out of weakness, but respect. "Miss Lopez, before we conclude, we have one final question on record. It's not about the club shooting, not about the tapes, not about the career, it's about you." Jennifer sat upright, her hands folded, her eyes steady. "What do you want the jury and the world to understand from your testimony today?" She didn't answer immediately. She took a breath, not the kind to calm nerves, but the kind a person takes before telling the most important truth of their life. "I want them to understand that image is a lie. For years, people looked at me and said, 'She's so lucky. She's with the king of hip-hop. She's on top of the world.' But behind every diamond necklace was a silence I never agreed to. Behind every award show appearance was a night. I cried in a locked bathroom, praying anyone would notice that something was wrong. She looked directly at the jury, and then, almost deliberately, at the camera that wasn't even allowed in the courtroom, as if speaking to the world beyond the walls. You think we come out stronger after the storm, but sometimes we come out quieter, more careful, more haunted. I learned how to smile in interviews while my soul begged me to leave. I learned how to accept flowers from the same hands that threatened to destroy me. She swallowed hard, but her voice never broke, only grew more raw. Diddy didn't just hurt me. He erased me slowly. He made me question my worth, my instincts, my voice. And when I finally left, I wasn't sure there was anything left of me to save. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye, but she didn't flinch. But I found something. Beneath the silence, beneath the fear, I found my truth. And no one gets to take that from me again. The gallery sat motionless, as if the weight of her words had pinned them to their seats. The judge leaned back, visibly moved, unsure how to close a moment so full of gravity. The prosecutor gave a slight nod and turned to the bench. The witness may step down, Your Honor. Jennifer stood slowly. Her heels touched the courtroom. Floor one last time, but this time, they didn't echo. They thundered. She walked past the defense table without a glance, past the media row, past the whispers, past the years she'd been buried under fame and silence. And as she reached the doors, she didn't look back, because she didn't have to. The truth was no longer trapped inside her. It was public. It was permanent. It was power reclaimed. And for the first time in over 20 years, Jennifer Lopez walked out of a courtroom not as someone's girlfriend, not as a pop icon, but as her whole unbroken self. The heavy courtroom doors shut behind her, but the silence she left behind spoke louder than any closing argument ever could. Inside, no one moved. Not the jury, not the judge, not even Diddy, especially not Diddy. He sat at the defense table, his hands clenched tightly on the edge, knuckles white, jaw locked. Or a man who had built a reputation on presence in being untouchable, unshakable. He now looked smaller than ever. His world, carefully engineered over decades, had been pierced. Not by violence, not by scandal, but by a woman's voice. A voice he once thought he could control. Behind the closed courtroom doors, Jennifer Lopez didn't walk fast. She didn't run. She didn't hide behind handlers or sunglasses. She walked. Slowly, deliberately, like someone finally carrying her own name again. Outside, the world had changed. Crowds had gathered. Reporters elbowed for space. Cameras rolled endlessly, even though they'd missed the most important. Footage of all, what happened inside couldn't be captured. It had to be heard. And those who heard it would never forget. Inside, the judge cleared his throat. The court will now enter into recess before jury deliberations. But even he spoke slower, as if still absorbing the magnitude of what had unfolded. Jurors remained seated long after they were dismissed, their eyes lingering on the witness stand where J-Lo had sat, the very same stand where people had lied, deflected, denied. But not today. Today, it had been a confessional, a reckoning, a reclaiming. One of the jurors, a woman in her 50s, quietly whispered to the man next to her that wasn't just testimony, that was liberation. Back outside, Jennifer walked to her car alone, no security detail, warmed her, shouting questions one after another, each more breathless than the last. Jennifer, do you regret saying everything under oath? Will this affect your career going forward? What do you want to say to the women still afraid to speak? She didn't respond, not with words. She simply looked into the lens's calm. Unflinching in that single gaze, every question was answered. Because when you've finally spoken the truth, you buried for 2 decades. You don't owe anyone anything more. Inside the courtroom, Diddy's attorney leaned in, whispering, urgently. But Diddy didn't respond. He just stared at the empty witness chair haunted by it. For years, he'd controlled the music, the parties, the headlines, but not this. Not anymore. That chair empty now had become the most dangerous place in the courtroom. It had turned into a mirror. And what he saw in it couldn't be denied, deleted, or spun. It saw him back and the world. The world had already decided. 3 days later, the verdict was still pending. But outside the courthouse, the story had already taken root deep in places no jury could ever reach.
Across social media.
In news broadcasts, on podcasts, in living rooms, and in the quiet corners of people's hearts. Jennifer Lopez's testimony wasn't just trending, it was resonating. It was being replayed, quoted, dissected not for gossip but for truth. For the first time, her name wasn't tethered to the glitz of a red carpet or the arms of a powerful man. It stood alone, raw and defiant as a symbol of survival. Inside, the court reconvened. The jury had questions, not just about facts, but about patterns, about power, about behavior, and fear. The prosecutor could feel it, the shift in the room's energy. This wasn't about one woman and one man anymore. It was about a system, a culture, and the courage it took to crack. It opened from the inside. The defense tried to reset the tone. They called in industry figures to speak on Diddy's generosity, his philanthropy, his legacy. They played highlight reels. They spoke in past tenses, if trying to preserve a version of him that no longer existed. But no one in that courtroom could unhear what they'd heard. No one could unsee the strength in Jennifer's eyes when she said she was done bargaining with silence. On the final day, as closing arguments wrapped, the judge addressed the courtroom. His voice was even but heavy. This case is not about celebrities. It is not about fame. It is about credibility. It's about truth. And whether we, as a society, believe that silence bought with power is a form of consent or a cry for help. He looked directly at the jury. You've heard testimony. You've seen evidence. Now it's time to decide which voice carries more weight, the one that demanded silence, or the one that finally broke it. The jury filed out. This passed. When they returned, the room held its breath. But Jennifer wasn't there. She didn't need to be. Her presence had already been etched into the wood grain of that courtroom, into every mind seated in those 12 chairs. Whether the verdict found Diddy guilty or not was no longer the only thing that mattered. Because Jennifer Lopez had done what few dared to do, she walked into a courtroom and lit a match beneath an empire built on fear. And whether or not justice came stamped by a jury, she had already delivered her own, not in whispers, not in interviews, but in full view, under oath, with no cameras allowed. It's just the truth, the kind of truth that doesn't fade when the headlines do, the kind that starts movements, it's the kind that echoes forever.